Now, let's set up all of our widget classes so that we can see all of our interaction keys, names, and all of that good stuff on screen. I'd like to set up my interact notify display first. So let's open this up. I'll then head over to my graph. And we have this function, which is add notify to container. So we'll need a container to add the notify to. And to do that, we can head back to the designer, head over to panel, and we can insert a canvas panel to the root. And next, we'll add a vertical box to that canvas, and I'll anchor this to the left center. I'll select size the content to be true, and on the position X, I'll give it a value of something like 75, so it's slightly to the right. I'll then rename this vertical box to be notify container. And I'm going to set is variable to be true. This way we can access this widget in the graph. So we'll need to do a couple of things. Firstly, we'll need a way to access this notify. We'll need a variable so that we can set the name of each notify when we add it or pick an item up. And to do that, I can simply create a variable called item name of type text, and I'll make this instance editable and expose on spawn. Now again, this is in the WB interaction notify widget, not the WB interaction notify display widget. So now we can head back to the notify display widget, and we can drag off of this function and search for create widget. We can select interact notify and connect the item name to the input of this function. Next, I want to promote this to a variable. I'll then delete this from the graph and rename this variable to be interaction notifies. And we can make this an array as well. And this doesn't need to be accessed anywhere else, so I can make this private. Let's now get this variable, drag off, and we're going to search for add. So for each interaction notify that's being added to this array or that is being created, we'll store a reference to it in this array, and we can then use that array to remove them after, let's say, an animation has been played or after a few seconds. The next thing to do is get my notify container and search for add child to vertical box. And the child that we want will be the return value from the create widget node. All right. Next, we'll trigger the function that attempts to remove the notify after a few seconds. And to do that, we can use a set timer by function name. Now, the function name that we'll need, I'm going to type this in. So remove notify from container. And I want to copy the entry text. I'll set the time to be 3. So after 3 seconds, it will remove the notify from the screen. And I want to ensure that looping is set to true. And lastly, I'll drag off and search for return node. And that's that. So we'll need to create a function with the exact same name that I copied here. So just add a function, paste the name, and now this will understand that this is the function we are trying to access when removing items. So let's set this function up. Remove notify from container. We'll first need to check if the notify container contains any children. So I'm going to get the notify container. We're going to drag off and search for has any children. Add a branch. And if it does, then we need to get the interaction notifies array, and we can search for remove index. We want to remove the item at index 0 because it's the first one that's been added. When one is removed completely, then the one above it will then become 0, and then we'll remove that one and repeat the process. Next, we'll get the notify container and remove child at index 0. All right. And then we can add our return node right to the end. Now, if it does not have any more children, then we want to clear the timer. We don't want this timer to be constantly looping, checking infinitely. So when the last notify is removed, 3 seconds after, it will check if it has any children. And if it doesn't, then we want to clear the timer. So from the false bin, we're going to drag off and search for clear timer by function name. And the function name would be the exact same thing. Remove notify from container. And then we can call our return node. And that's it. We can delete all of this because we don't need this. Compile and save. We can close this notify display widget. In the interaction notify widget itself, it's relatively simple to set up. So I'm thinking we can do that now. First, I'll get a size box and I'll plug this in as a root. I'll then change my view mode from fill screen to desired on screen so we can see the exact size of our widget. I'll then override my width and height. And for the width, I'm thinking something like 250. And for the height, I'll do 100 maybe. Let's do 80. Yeah. I'll then add an overlay to my size box. And an overlay can contain many elements. A size box can only hold one child. So what I'm going to do is add a background blur. So I'm going to head over to special effects, insert a background blur, and I'll set the vertical and horizontal alignment to be fill. I'll then set the blur strength to be something like 7. Yeah, that's fine. And next we'll insert a border into this overlay as well. So it's being placed on top of the background blur, and that's fine. I'll then set the horizontal and vertical alignment as well. But this time I want to modify the color, the brush color, to be black. And I'll change my alpha value from a solid value of 1 to 25%, which is 0.25. Right, so it's a bit square, a little rectangle or whatever. So I'm going to add a bit of roundness, bevel the edges a bit. So I'm going to select my border, select the brush category right here, change the draw type from image to rounded box, and then I'll change the outline settings from, well, the rounding type from half height radius to fixed radius, and I'll change the corner radius to a value of 5. So it's a bit curved on the edge. Next, I'll set an outline color of white. So that just like that, we have that. And I'll set the width to be 1. So great, we have a nice, neat little outline. Next, I'll select my background blur, head over to advanced, and I'll set blur radius to be true. This way we can see it a lot better. And I'll set the corner radius to be 5 as well, so that everything curves just fine. I'll uncheck blur radius. It doesn't look like it right now, but it will be when you hit play. What you can do is if you select it and you do blur radius, you can drag it to a lot more. You can see it being modified, but 5 is just fine. Great. Next, we can add a vertical box to this. I'll add that to the overlay. And we can anchor this to the center left. And we need a few texts. So I'm going to add my first text and another text. And in between, I want to add a spacer. So I'm going to head over to primitive and add a spacer in between both of these text blocks. For this one, I'm going to rename it to be item name. And for this one, I'll just rename it to be item collected. And this is going to have a simple text, which is +1 collected. Now this is a static text. This does not change at all, but the item name does. So I want to make this a variable. And next we'll just need to modify the font size. So I'm going to select both of these texts, modify the font size from 24 to maybe like 16. And I'll change the one item collected text from typeface from bold to maybe regular. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But I'm going to make it a little smaller, so maybe 12. Yeah. I'll then select my vertical box and I'll add a padding to the left so it doesn't, kiss the edge like this. I'll do 10, maybe 15. And the space in between, I'm going to give it a value on the Y of maybe like 10. Yeah. Maybe less. Let's do 7. Now let's head over to the graph. I'm going to delete the event construct and event tick. And I'll get the item name variable, drag off and search for set text. And the item name variable that we created previously would be the in text. Connect this to your pre-construct. And that's all for this interaction notify widget. We're going to go into the largest widget this far, and that is the interaction display. I'm going to delete this image that I added for testing. And let's set up the hierarchy for all our elements. All right, so this is going to contain things like our progress bar, our interaction key, all of that. So I'm going to add a canvas panel firstly. And I want to change this to be full screen. I'll then add an overlay. And within this overlay, we can add a vertical box. We'll then need a horizontal box, a horizontal box. And this horizontal box should hold things like our key and the name of the item. So it will have the key to the left and the item name to the right. In this horizontal box, I'll then add a size box because we want some space for the item indicator. And this overlay will be anchored to the center, by the way, and I'll select size to content to be true. So for this size box, I'll set, right, so I'm going to set my width and height override to be 55. I find these values to be working just fine for me. Within this size box, I'll add another overlay. And in this second overlay, I'll add a radial slider. I'll then select this radial slider and we can rename this to be hold progress bar. Okay. I'll then set the slider handle start angle to be 0 and the slider handle end angle to be 360 so that we can get a complete circle. I'll then set the angular offset to be 180 so that it will start at the top. So if I modify this value, we'll go like this. Hands complete. So I want to uncheck show slider handle, because I don't need that big, bulge right there. I'll then set the slider bar color opacity to 0.25, which is 25%. And I'll leave the color for the progress bar itself to be white. Next, I'll add another size box to the overlay, which is the second overlay. And I'll set the horizontal and vertical alignment to be center. I'll then modify the width and height to be 32 by 32. Now, let's add a third overlay to this size box. And in here, we want to add an image. Can just do an image. And this will be our background for our key. This doesn't need to be a variable, by the way. And I'm just going to rename this to be key background. I'll drop down the category for brush, change this to be a rounded box. And for the outline settings, I'm going to set the width to be 1. The rounding type to be a fixed radius, and I'm going to set the corner radius to be 5. Now that we have this, we're looking pretty good. We can then add a text to the third overlay, and I'm going to set this to be center as well. I'll change the font size to be something like 12, and the color value to be 0.01, so you get a nice dark gray. I'll clear the text and I'll use a example debugging text for now, which is E. And that looks pretty good. We can make it slightly smaller, I'm thinking, so maybe 11. Yeah. Great. Looking pretty good so far. Now, within this horizontal box, I'll then get a primitive spacer, place it, and the X in between will be a value of 10. And I'll add a text to this horizontal box as well, and this will be our item's name. So I'm going to rename this text to be item name, and this is going to be a variable because this needs to be modified at runtime. I'll then ensure that the vertical alignment is set to center so that it doesn't be, up here. I'll set the font size to be, let's see, maybe 15. 16. Yeah. I'll do 16 for now. You can modify this however you like. And I'll set the text to be none. Great. The next thing we need is an image for our indicator. I'm just going to drag this image into the first overlay, and I'll anchor this to be center. Now, if you recall, we created a material to use for the indicator. So I'm going to select this material instance, open back my interaction display, and insert that right there. I'll then modify the image size to be 10, because we don't need it to be like really huge or anything. I'll then rename this to be indicator, select both of them, and I'll set the visibility to be collapsed. Good. Now, time for logic. By the way, we need to set this interaction key to a variable. So I'll just call this key and make it a variable. Let's head over to the graph. The setItemName function is going to be simple since it's already opened. I'm just going to get the item name, drag off, and search for setText. Now, I want the text to be uppercase letters. So I'm going to drag off of the input and I'll search for to upper and connect the return value to the in text. Lastly, we can call our return node. And that's it for this function. We need to set up all of the functions that we created previously, like update health progress, which we can do now. It's really quick. I'll create a new variable called current health time, and I'll make this a float. I'll then get this variable, and I'll do a plus operator. And I want to add the world delta seconds to this. I can then set my current held time with this new updated value. And I want to divide this by our maximum held time so that we can increment or update our progress bar based on the value given, the max held time given. Next, I want to ensure that this doesn't go above 1 and below 0, so I'll clamp this between 0 and 1. And I'll get my held progress bar, drag off and search for set value. Plug the return value to the in value, and from the return value again, I want to check if it's greater than or equal to a value of 1. If it is, this means that interaction is successful and we reach the maximum value of our progress bar. So if the value is greater than or equal to 1, we can just return that value. In the reset held progress function, it's going to be really simple as well. Let's see here. Okay, right, so let's get our held progress bar. We are going to get the value. From the value, we want to check something first because we don't want to just reset this if it's already 0. So only if it's greater than 0, then we would reset the progress bar. Let's get the held progress bar again, and we can search for set value, and I'll leave the in value to be 0. Next, I want to reset the current held time just in case it have, some sort of data still stored in it, some value. So set this back to 0. And at the end here, we can play an animation or something that says, interaction cancelled or something, or failed. So now I can close these two functions. We have the update interaction display function to do, so I'm thinking we should do that now. Get it out of the way. Right, so I'm going to head back to my designer here. I'll select this spacer and I'll make it a variable. We have, let's see, horizontal box, interaction icon. We have this overlay. Okay, I'll just grab the entire horizontal box. Right. So our outer branch, if is indicator is true, this means we only want to display the indicator and we don't want to see any of this other data with the name and the key and all that. So I will select this vertical box and I'll make this a variable. And I'll call this main VB. I'll then get main VB and search for set visibility. And if it is an indicator, we want to just set this to be collapsed. And we want to show the item indicator. So I'm going to replace this main VB variable with indicator. And I'll set the visibility to be visible. So if indicator is true, then we hide everything else and show the indicator. And then we can exit the function by calling our return node. Now, if this indicator is false, this means we are trying to access our interaction functionality. So I'll just duplicate these two nodes, connect this to false, and the main VB, I'll set this to be visible, and the indicator, I'll set to be collapsed. Now, there's something we need to think about. Do we want to display our held progress bar even when we are our interaction type is press or not? Or do you only want to display it when it's a whole interaction? And that's optional. You can simply get the held progress bar and update that visibility based on the interaction type from the AC item settings. So we can drag off and search for interaction type. We can either do a switch or we could run a select, connect this to the index, and if it's hold, then we hide it, and then if we press, we leave it visible, things like that. But I'm not going to do that. Right, you can do that. I'm going to save and close. Now, what did we miss? We did set item name. Yeah. Right, so you need to update the interaction key dynamically so that when you change the key in your input mapping context, for example, or let's say you have a main menu and you swap out the key, this needs to be updated. I'll delete the event constructs and event tick, and I'll create another function called set interaction key. I'll then create a variable, and this would be our input mapping context. Now this, we will need to select our used input mapping context, whichever one you're using for your project. I'll then get this variable, convert it to a validated get, and this is just in case you forgot to set the default value here. From this, we can get the mappings, and we can do a for each loop break. Awesome. We can now break this array element, and we only need access to the key and the action. So I'm going to uncheck triggers and modifiers. From the action, I'm going to drag off and search for equal equal. And the action that I want to search for is my IA interact. For the key, I'll promote this to a local variable, and this will be our target key. Connect this to the loop body. And from the return value of this equal equal node, I'll promote this to a variable as well, a local variable. And I'll call this key found. And if key found is true, then we want to break the loop. There's no need to run down the entire array of mappings anymore. Alright, so off of the completed, I'm going to add a branch. And if key found is true, then I want to get the key variable, and I'll search for set text. I'll then get the target key, get the display name. I'll uncheck long display name because we don't want to show right mouse button. We just want to see RMB or something, you know. I'll then ensure that this is only uppercase letters. So I'm going to search for to upper. And I'll connect this to the in-text of the set text function. Lastly, I'll call my return node. You can close this function and set it on the event pre-construct. So now what's going to happen? If I hit play, let's see. Let me just put it on a larger window for you guys so they can see everything properly. So basically what's going to happen is it should display everything just fine. So let's walk up. You can see the item indicator is being displayed and it's animated, it's blinking. And if I go closer into the second sphere, you should see an item added to the item pool, right? And you can see our interaction key is being displayed. Now our progress bar needs to be reset each time. So we can just set the default value to be 0, and we'll need to update the item name. Currently, we don't have a name set here, which is why you did not see a name. So for the progress bar, I'll set the value to be 0. And I'll just call this test item. Also press input, and I'll give it a max hold time of 1 for when I'm ready to switch in test. So currently it's a press. So if I go up to this and I press E, nothing would happen because we haven't added our input action to our input mapping context. So let's do that now. I'll add a new mapping, select interact, and I'll change the key to be something other than E so that you can see the set interaction key function actually working. I'm going to set it to Y. If I go up now, you can see Y test item. I get back, it's removed, and I go this way, it gets removed entirely. Right? So obviously you can animate this, the transition, so it's not so snappy. You could create like a nice smooth fade in and out. But yeah, just like that, you've created a really awesome interaction system. That concludes our entire tutorial. We can even test out the hold progress. I'll set it to something other than a 1, so maybe 1.5 or 3. Hit play again, and we can see what we get. Right. So, lastly, we'll need to check if our input key is actually updating our interaction. So I'm just going to set this to be E because we know it works, and let's test it. It's updating. When I reach up there, it destroys the actor. You see test item 1 collected, and the item pool is now been reset to 0. Awesome. Now we can take this a lot further, like different item range or height to play different animations and all of that. But I'm going to save that for the future. If you guys request that, I will create a tutorial on how to do so. Thank you for following. And that's it for this one. Bye.